A very good evening and welcome to this edition of the Fourth Estate. Charles Mangushampagi, and tonight we'll be examining the statements of various senior officials in relation to the February 18th elections. First is Inspector General of Police Kale Kaihura and his plans with the crime preventers. Will they be armed or not? Will they take away the sticks and replace them with rifles? What does that mean? And what does he mean when he talks about a threat of war, in case of war? We'll also be examining the words of the Chief of Defense Forces, General Katumba Wamala, also in relation to a threat of war in case something goes wrong with the February 18th elections. The latest, we have the arrest of General David Sejusa, his former coordinator of intelligence agencies, and now he's been arrested, and one of the few generals in the country. Who arrested him? Why has he been arrested? When does he appear in court? What does that mean? Is it related to statements he's been making in relation to the elections? And of course, we'll also tackle a little bit of the statements attributed to the Secretary General of the National Resistance Movement, Justin Kasule Lumumba, who was also talking about the state will shoot your children should they come on the street to protest a rigged election. Let me introduce in studio tonight, starting with my colleague Angelo Izama. Angelo, very nice to have you once again.
Thank you, Charles.
We also have with us Pade Ankunda, Lieutenant Colonel Pade Ankunda. You've been promoted since?
Well, you have the rank right.
I have the rank right.
Yeah.
Very nice to have you. And for purpose of Pade Ankunda, let me actually add to what we'll be discussing. The National Resistance Movement celebrated 30 years on Tuesday. Pade Ankunda was MC at that event at St. Leo's College, Chegobe Grounds in Fort Portal. And now you are going through the military games, the journey towards Tarehe Sita, which is actually the effort that brought into power the National Resistance Movement, which will be celebrated on 6th February, which will be next Saturday, is it?
Yes.
Next Saturday.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we'll be discussing that as well. And 30 years since the NIM came to power will be the broader discussion also. And let me introduce, so Pade Ankunda, you're most welcome.
Thank you.
Nice to have you.
Good evening, listeners.
And
viewers.
We have David Mushabe. David Mushabe Gureme works with Mushabe, Munungu and Company Advocates, and you have represented, or you continue to represent, General David Sejusa.
That's correct.
Very nice to have you. For people who have forgotten, David Gureme Mushabe used to host the Spectrum talk show on Radio 1 many years ago, and then branched out permanently almost into legal work.
And issues at hand.
And issues at hand, yes. Very nice to have you, gentlemen.
Where are most journalists turning to the law? Because Charles is about to graduate from
wonderful.
the law program in Makerere.
I'm still very far from it, but I'm struggling. And you were there before. Let me start with the latest news. And starting with you, David Mushabe. We understand that your client was, General David Sejusa, was earlier today arrested. Is that true?
That is true.
When, where, how?
Well, this morning at around, I had a meeting with him. I had an appointment to meet with him at 1 o'clock. So about 12 noon, I started receiving phone calls. Is it true what we're hearing about the general? I said, what is that? I said, military police has surrounded his home. I said, no, I have not had any.
His home where?
At Naguru.
Naguru, okay.
Yes. So I said, look, I have not gotten any information, but I'm going to try my best and find out what is actually going on. Then my colleague, Ladislas Rakafuzi, also calls me. He said, is it true? Then NTV calls me, then NBS calls me. So I decided, I was calling his phone numbers, and he was not answering. So I decided to drive to his home. But before I got to his home, a mutual friend called me. He said, look, the general, everybody that is going to his home, they are being told that
they can't exit.
That he has left. He has stepped out. But we see the home is surrounded. So I called a couple of lawyers. I said, why don't you come and we sit down and see, forge a way forward. So we went to Legends at Lugogo. As we were there, I tried to call his son, who is my partner. That's Munungu. I am Mushabe, he's Munungu. So I called his son's phones were off, but then he eventually called me back. He said, look, my father has just called me and confirmed that he has been arrested and he's detained at Maki Indian military barracks. And then he told him, get in touch with Mushabe and Rwakafuzi and Max Mtabingwa and Mike Mabike. See what you can do. See if you can come and we talk. I want to brief you on what is going on. So I proceeded to Makindye police barracks, military police barracks, with Kenneth Munungu and Mike Mabike. And we were told they needed to have some authorization or clearance from above. You know, in this country there is a word called above. So they said they are going to get clearance from above.
There's a being called above.
There's a being called above. So they said, now leave the gates of the barracks, park on the side of the road, as we wait for the word from above. So we went and parked across the street. And then the soldier comes and says, I have been instructed that you can only see your client only on Wednesday and Saturday. I said, but I have 3 prisoners here in this barracks. I have seen them whenever I wanted. What is so special with this one? The Wednesday and Saturday are for just civilians, but for lawyers, they have a right to meet with their clients because that right is enshrined in the Constitution. A detainee has a right to consult with his lawyer anytime he wishes. So he says, anyway, those are the orders I got. I don't care what you are saying. So what I decided, I parked on the side, and I called Kano Kanyesiji, whom I understand is in charge of the entire Makindye barracks. Said, look, can I see my client? He wants to see me. We are here. We want to meet with him. And he says, okay, you know, this is a very sensitive matter. We have never detained the general at this barracks. So this is a very sensitive matter. Let me get back to you. And I sat there, and after 30 minutes, I was not receiving any call back. So I called the Kano.
Again?
Yes, and the phones were off. So we sat there until about 5 o'clock. Then I realized that the matter is not only legal, but it is political. So we drove off and we sat somewhere. We strategized for tomorrow. The strategy will be known.
You haven't spoken to General Sejusa as of now?
I have not.
Has any other lawyer spoken to him?
No.
And do you know why he's been detained?
We don't know. That is still a secret. Maybe Fandi shall tell us why my client has been arrested. That is still a mystery.
Let me come to you immediately. What is this about General David Sejusa?
Well, I think this is business as usual.
Business as usual to detain generals?
Yeah, when the state
is business as usual?
When the state cracks the whip against errant officers, I think it's a good development. And the orders were very clear that he be incarcerated, and that's what has happened.
So there
should be no worry.
Help our viewers, because they may not understand the language you're speaking. Your language and David's language, you speak the military jargon and he speaks the legal language, the legal jargon. Our viewers, some of your viewers may not understand. So, basic things. Has General David Sejusa been arrested?
Absolutely. He's under arrest.
He's under arrest?
Yes.
And he's being detained at Makindye military barracks?
He's under detention.
What is he being charged with?
Well, we are looking at a number of things. First of all, I think his conduct has been very, very inconsistent with the behavior of the institution. And
can you explain that?
He has made several statements, so we want him to explain, and the court will help us do that. First of all, for example, he said that there was an election in this country which was rigged, yet it was in favor of some contestant that he mentioned. You remember that statement?
You can help us.
He said, for example, that Dr. Kiza Besigye had actually won that election, and that the election was rigged. That's not proper. Secondly, he's been making statements in partisan platforms. He even went ahead to go on rallies with some people and made statements. That's not correct. He is a serving military officer. He's not retired. He has been making statements to the media, and obviously, if you make statements to the media according to the Code of Conduct of the UPDF Act without proper authorization, that's criminal.
So have you...
So there are several things that we're looking at.
So far, have you preferred any actual charges?
The charges are being preferred, and obviously, I hear his lawyer saying that he hasn't seen him. That shouldn't worry you at all.
Is that true?
Yeah.
That you've denied him access to his lawyer?
He will get access because...
No, but so far, you picked him up about what time?
This morning. Early morning.
Early morning?
Yeah.
And since early morning, you haven't allowed him access to his lawyer?
Yeah.
And have you allowed him access to his family?
I may need to check that, but one thing for sure that I've checked is that the lawyers will access him at an appropriate time. We're thinking that he could go to court on Tuesday, and obviously he will have legal representation. That shouldn't worry anyone.
Isn't it odd that someone is arrested and so far hasn't been allowed access to his lawyer?
Well,
it's a normal practice.
It depends, because you see...
Because I think two categories of people have privileges to access a suspect in detention, and that is his family, his or her family, and their legal representatives.
I think what the public should let the military handle this matter professionally, because we know that there is need for legal representation, and they are going to meet their client. The family will obviously see their person, but I don't think there is need for pressure. This is a general, and there are a number of things that are being considered. So there should be no pressure. Let's do our job professionally and get things done legally.
It is your word that you haven't preferred actual charges on him so far. You're working out what exactly charging with.
I can also tell you and the public actually that the file is almost complete. Just a few things.
And it is your word that it relates to his inconsistent behavior and the number of statements he's made.
Absolutely.
And the different forums in which he's made those statements.
When he's still a serving military officer, not retired, and he knows that. He's a lawyer.
And now, a question I have picked up from discussion since his arrest and the news of his arrest running all over media is the question about the manner of arrest. Does it strike you as strange? Section 185 of the UPDF Act spells out the manner of arrest of any officer, any military officer, and says they are either arrested by the commanding officer of the unit, or they are arrested by someone of a similar or senior rank to them. It's our understanding that the arrest of General David Sejusa was executed by someone a rank below him, and who is not his commanding officer.
Well, I don't think that's a problem actually, because first of all, General Charles Angina, who conducted the arrest,
Lieutenant General Charles Angina,
Lieutenant General Charles Angina, thank you, was under instruction and had delegated authority from the Chief of Defense Forces to conduct the arrest. That's one. Secondly, he was accompanied by the commandant of military police.
Of what rank?
A colonel.
A colonel.
They have powers to arrest anybody, being the disciplinary unit of the institution.
They're not of same or senior rank, are they?
No, I mean, colonel. The colonel commanding the military police is at a lower rank.
Yes.
But I don't find that a problem at all, by the way, because if the officer was acting under delegated authority of the commanding officer of the UPDF, being the unit under which we operate, there is no problem at all with that.
Okay,
I don't think it's inconsistent anyway with that.
Just one more question before I turn to Angelo. The question of the place of detention. By practice, officers at a certain rank have not been detained at the Makindye military barracks or any other barracks. They have been detained at the officers' mess. Why Sejusa at Makindye?
Well, two things. First of all, the officers' mess is busy now, and therefore we couldn't detain a general. Secondly, I think it's at the discretion also of the arresting officer, because there were orders for arrest where the officer being arrested should be detained.
Okay.
And in this case, a decision was taken that the general be detained at Makindye, and we don't find a problem with that at all.
Does it surprise you that of all military officers who've been playing a role or made statements related to the February 18th elections, it's General David Sejusa that ends up in detention?
Well, no surprises, because you see, General Sejusa has not just said things about the forthcoming elections alone. He has made sectarian statements that risk disrupting the cohesion of the institution.
Okay.
That's dangerous. Making sectarian statements in the UPDF and our law is criminal.
The people who read that and say, because he's making those statements apparently in favor of the opposition, and those who are making them in favor of President Yoweri Museveni or General Yoweri Museveni, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, have been given a free pass.
Well, I don't think it's a matter of whether the statements are pro the opposition or pro government. We need to look at the law the way it is.
Thank you.
And apply it as appropriately. That's very important.
Let me turn to Angelo briefly. Angelo, does this strike you? Is there any significance in this arrest coming only hardly 3 weeks to the elections?
Well, I think the public, from what we hear and from what people who are involved in the campaigns are doing, correctly, concerned about the rhetoric that is seemingly more harsh from their leaders, particular leaders. I was at dry cleaners earlier for obvious reasons, and the young lady was telling me, "Oh, but what all this war talk? What do you make of it?" Because she figured I was coming to your show, and she was like, "But we don't see anything happening on the ground. There's a lot of talk about chaos." And so it is something that is present in the air. There's tension in the air, and one of the most vocal public figures on this for the last 2 years has been General David Tinyefuza. I think we were treated to a huge spectacle about his exile and the various interviews that he did. I think most ordinary people would conclude that he's been taken out of the equation so that the rhetoric would be reduced. That doesn't mean, of course, that the problem doesn't go away. I personally feel that he may have been arrested, he belongs to an institution, but the primary characters in this election must tone down their rhetoric. Ordinary people seem to be quite scared.
David Mushabe, let me come back to you on this same thing. Anything you see, the relationship between the elections, the statements that Kanankunda has been talking about, and the arrest of your client? He's been, some people say he's been quite reckless in some of his statements, and he's still a serving military officer.
One, my brother, freedom of speech is enshrined in the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda. 2, my client, for several years, he has not been paid his salary. His pips and military uniform was withdrawn from him. Soldiers were withdrawn from him. All military benefits were withdrawn from him. In common law, and actually in the laws of Uganda, there is a doctrine of constructive discharge. Constructive discharge manifests itself whereby you are hired but not given a desk where you should work from. You are not given any assignment to do, and you are not paid any salary. And that has been my client's position, that UPDF has effected constructive discharge on him.
Yeah, that is his interpretation.
Yes.
The institution to which he applied to be retired from hasn't retired him.
Yes. I'm coming to that.
Yes.
Now, his position is that with regard to constructive discharge, he is no longer a soldier. He doesn't belong to UPDF. Now, also the UPDF Act says that when somebody makes an application to be discharged from the military, he must receive an answer within 90 days. Those 90 days expired at the end of March 2015. UPDF has not provided any explanation why they have not written to him why he was not discharged or why he was kept. Now, in 1996, when he first requested for discharge and ended up in court with the government, won at the High Court, Court of Appeal, but lost at the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Thereafter, his colleagues, General Mwezi, General Tafire, General Muntu, and many other generals, including General Sari and General Museveni, were retired. This is a man who will tell you that they shot at him and a bullet missed his lung by an inch. This is a man who will tell you that one leg is shorter than the other. This is a man who is 61 years. So now, since then they have retired so many young people who don't have even a scratch on their body. And he's saying, I'm a 61-year-old who has so much to show for my sacrifice to this nation.
Well,
what is so special about keeping me in the military? So his position is that it is no longer military service, it is military prison.
I think what you just said, you lawyers call it for persuasive purposes only. Legally,
no, those are the facts.
No, legally he's still serving military officer.
But you see, no.
I think it's semantic.
Legally, but illegitimately.
Illegitimately.
Yes.
So
because what is the litmus? What standard do they use? If they use a standard, it must cut across the board.
When you appear in court,
pick and choose.
When you appear in court, are you preparing to appear before military court? Are you going to defend a civilian or a serving officer?
As far as we are concerned, we are defending a civilian, and for them they are charging a serving officer. And it is the court to determine whether the position they have taken is correct. But my brother here said that the man has been inconsistent. No, he has been consistent. Since 1996, he has been requesting for discharge. His colleagues have been discharged.
No, the statements, I think the consistency he's talking about is about the statement.
No, he raised four.
Yes.
He raised 4 points. He said also he has been errant.
Oh, yeah.
He's not errant. When did he become errant? So if he became errant, he must have become errant in 1996 when he first requested for discharge.
Okay.
Why wasn't he arrested then?
Okay.
Why is he arrested?
Let's put this in broader context, because this debate coming up in between 30 years celebrations of the NRM and what will be 35 years of the Uganda
NRA,
People's
UPDF.
NRA UPDF next Saturday, with an election coming up in under 3 weeks, should give us a good discussion platform when we come out of a short commercial break. We'll be right back. You're still watching The Fourth Estate, and we're discussing all these statements from senior military officials and the place of security forces in the 2016 February 18th elections. We started with the arrest this morning, or this Sunday morning, of General David Sejusa, who has clearly been making statements in support of the opposition and in serious disagreement with his commander-in-chief, President Museveni, who is also the candidate for the National Resistance Movement. People will ask questions and say, why haven't you retired him? You only retired General Henry Tumukunde the other day, gave him a yellow plane, and he's been all over the place flying and also making statements. He's still in the reserve. He has been retired a year.
He's a veteran.
And he's a veteran. People have also been talking about Shaban Mantariza. Down at the Uganda Government Media Center. He was also retired recently and has been making some statements. Angelo, is this a major contradiction that 30 years of liberation celebrated on Tuesday, 35 years of the National Resistance Army, National Resistance Movement, which will be marked on Saturday next week, and you have an arrest of a general who was one of the most outstanding struggleists in that struggle 35 years ago.
He's definitely
and
been
especially speaking about elections.
He's been quite a character. I spoke to one of his first jailers, who is Ruaramira Major, who told me how during the Bush War, General Tinyefuza had been detained for causing anger and angst amongst the forces, I think by suggesting that certain jobs must be reserved for particular type of officers from particular places. And then he was detained for a while. Now, he's definitely been someone who admittedly is interested in the reform program of the military, and he's taken it upon himself to do so in various ways in his distinguished career. What I thought, look, people like skirting around the issues, like all this war talk and violence talk, and it's a lot of it I think is the propaganda of the election. And I think it reflects the pressure of people who are actively involved in the election and the high stakes they have in that election. And they express it in ways that they express their fears, and something in psychology we call transference.
But does it strike you as odd that the people expressing this anxiety are people who should actually be playing the role of calming down everyone?
Yeah.
The Chief of Defense Forces, I think Pade will speak to that, General Kale Kaihura, who is still a serving military officer, on deployment in the Uganda in the Uganda Police Force, the Secretary General of the National Resistance Movement, Kasule Lumumba, speaking about war.
Yeah, first of all,
I mean, 30 years on,
first of all,
this is the last major war. You'd expect that we're speaking a different language.
Okay, let me first deal with the facts that I don't think that there is a contest here.
It does matters of war. To the
man who is wearing uniform. Yeah, but
I'll come to you in a moment.
Yeah. Let me just set the stage as far as my thinking around this. It's not unusual to find militaries that have a particular historical relationship with their community, their society, and their civilian government. And these contradictions cause problems for countries. In fact, I was just referring to 4 countries: Indonesia, Pakistan, as you know, men in uniform run the country, the military. People used to say, oh, in some countries have armies. In the case of Pakistan, the army has a country. You've got Turkey, you've got Egypt. All these are countries where the historical place of the military is significant in the politics that is now become emerging democracy. Now, in the case of the UPDF, you're right. 30 years on, they have a very, very difficult relationship with the state. The founder of the army is now an elected leader several times, but their military, which is also professional, is sitting back, and many of their officers, the military used to run the government, but practically like officers used to do administration here in after 86. Now those guys haven't gone away. I think that the pretense of our political system is that on the one hand, we think that elections are about reform of the government and the development process. That's what the rhetoric is about. I think that what the army is facing is the reform that's necessary for a military to coexist with, under these historical circumstances, a political reform. Now the political reform...
I think what put Sejusa in trouble is he talked about reform.
Yeah,
and he said you can't reform a dictatorship.
But that's precisely what I'm saying, is that political reform program cannot be conducted purely by elections. It has to be by the responsible conduct of people like himself.
Okay.
Now, I think you and I, and Paddy here, would agree that in a situation where there is really no contest of power in terms of force, people who are responsible for security shouldn't be making statements like there's going to be a war.
Now,
who's going to start the war?
Kanakonda, how can the military of all places be propagating sounding all these war drums? Your CDF, General Kaihura, General Sejusa. How can the institution of the Uganda People's Defense Forces and the armed forces generally be the one sounding war drums 30 years after what we're told was a liberation?
There's this rhetoric around the public, in the public, of war and war talk. And I'm not very sure that the statements which were made by these generals were not quoted out of context. Because when General Katumba Wamala, for example, talked about those who are planning violence, I was at that press briefing. He said, we are aware that there are some groups who are planning to cause violence. He did not use even the word war, but he was saying, we will not allow that violence to happen. Because that's not what the country wants at this moment. So I do not think that the generals have been saying there's going to be war. No. They have been saying if those planning to cause violence within this election, they will be stopped. We have intelligence that there are groups within this city within this country that have been planning to cause violence, particularly after the election, contesting the result.
David Sejusa talked about the threat of war in April 2013. He wrote a letter and said there was a scheme, planned assassinations of people. The letter caused only the shutdown of a newspaper, or 2 newspapers, the Daily Monitor and the Red Paper. He ran out of the country. He returned after negotiation. 2 years later, we are still talking about the threat of war, the threat of violence. General Kaihura was actually more candid. He talked about, in case there is war, the police is a reserve. So you crime preventers, as a part of the police force, you are part of the reserve. First, we call upon the police, then we'll call upon the crime preventers. Listen, what is this about? Why when you have an election, and the UPDF the NRA, more accurately, went to the bush to fight a rigged election. David Sejusa is talking about the cause that took the NRA to the bush and created the UPDF. The last war that the UPDF fought is 10 years ago, 2005 against the LRA. It hasn't been involved in a domestic war. Why this talk about?
2 things.
Yes.
I think General Sejusa's talk of war, 2 things. It could have been a figment of his mind, or at that time, he could have been planning to cause war. He made several statements, if you can recall. But this recent, I think this recent talk of possible violence has been completely put out of context.
By who? By
General
CDF,
Katumba did not say there is going to be war. I was at that briefing. I did not listen to the statements of the IGP myself.
I have seen the transcript.
So
it doesn't differ much from what the Observer reported.
I think we had better discuss now, how do we take the country to a post-election situation that has no violence? This is more important.
Why should they be violent?
Because there are groups that have been preparing.
Aren't you using the people who will look at this and say the military strongly? Angelo used a good expression. The military has a country, or the country has a military. the military that has a country, whose commander-in-chief, whose founder is a candidate in this election, seeking his 5th elective term in office, that the institutions of the armed forces are actually working to threaten the population by threatening or talking about violence and war, what you call the figment of someone's imagination, only to rally voters or to cow them into voting for the incumbent.
Not at all.
And because this has been Sejusa's major contestation, he says they were together with the generals that David Mushabe talked about. All the others have been retired, and to their credit, many of them, apart from Mugisha Muntu and a few others, are serving in the interest of the incumbent. The other day, Tumukunde was retired. Now he's moving around in a campaign helicopter. Isn't this a kind of double standard?
You are raising 2 issues there.
Yes.
One, and I think I should correct this. There can not be a situation where you pity the military against the civilians in this country now, because a couple of days from now we're going to celebrate Tarehe. That basically highlights our strategic relationship with the people.
Tarehe for the uninitiated is the 6th of February.
Yeah.
The day the NRA launched it.
It's the birthday,
of the UPDF.
So because that's our strength. And in fact, that's what we rally around while dealing with violence. Because we have the people behind the military.
Let me
that relationship is very important.
Yes. Let me broaden it a little. The commander-in-chief talks about smashing. The Secretary General of the party talks about the state shooting children who go out to protest a rigged election. The chief of the Uganda Police Forces, who is a military general, talks about war and holding up the reserves. The chief of defense forces talks about violence and the military not allowing it.
No,
seriously?
No,
there must be a problem somewhere.
Don't cause alarm.
They are causing alarm. The people making the rhetoric.
Listen, what needs to be very clear here is that the security forces will firmly deal with anyone who wants to cause violence in this country,
including the
and we have these mechanisms.
The incumbent.
You know, we tend to forget that we recently delivered a very successful visit by His Highness the Pope. Working under the mechanism that we have established.
The treasurer broke.
Well, that's another discussion.
Yes.
But the point is, the security forces are working together. And we have intelligence, we have indicators that some groups have been trying to cause violence, preparing to cause violence. Chikankane, Chifesi, there are quite a number.
What is in a name?
And, well, if you have characters behind these names,
and
aware that their history is rather violent, we would rather prepare.
David Mushabe.
You see, we can't ignore any bit of intelligence on this. We will not.
Well, I don't know when the intelligence is blown out of context or used for political purposes.
No,
not serious security purposes.
You'd rather act on wrong intelligence than not acting at all on correct intelligence,
but
because that would be disastrous.
You last fought a war 10 years ago.
And
yes, which is this other emerging threat?
No, it's this excitement within the public about the election and the likely violence after the election shouldn't be taken for granted. Because we have seen characters in this country, in this city, running people behind them and causing destruction for business people, including loss of life.
And that is the responsibility of the military?
Well, we work under the law.
And where do you put the line between allowing people to freely express themselves through demonstrations, assemblies and other things, and what you're talking about as the threat of threatening business?
No, because the law is very clear. Section 43 of the UPDF Act mandates the UPDF, if requested by the police, support them as appropriate. And it actually further states that we don't need any authority from anyone else if requested under this section. Okay,
I hear you there,
yes.
But place the UPDF in between these significant events.
Yes.
30 years of the NRM, Tuesday.
Yes.
35 years of the NRA UPDF, next Saturday. An election on 18th February. And the discussion we're having today. Did the founders of the NRA UPDF, the founders of the National Resistance Movement, envisage that 30 years later we'll be having this kind of discussion in the way we're having this kind of discussion?
Well, you see, I cannot read into the future. But what I know, war is politics by other means.
You can read the past. You can read the
this
past.
This is exactly what I'm saying. We had the war in this country. We had the NRA bringing into power the NRA. Obviously, the relationship is there. And we're very, very clear on this. Over time, we've told the country that we shall remain non-partisan. And people must hear me here. This force will remain non-partisan. I have said on TV, on radios, that it doesn't matter who the people's choice is going to be. Come 18th, 19th of February, the UPDF will salute whoever will be elected by the people of Uganda through a free and fair election.
Okay. I need to bring in David. I think that's an important assurance.
Yeah.
Whether you prepare that outcome before by what you do before is a different question, which we can discuss. But let me just bring in David Mushabe briefly, because we're supposed to be taking a break. David, the country appears almost to be at a crossroads. And many people think this country shouldn't be at a crossroads simply because there is an election, if you're trying to build a democracy. Now, if you place your client, General David Sejusa, in between the struggle he was a part of 35 years ago and the liberation he was a part of 30 years ago and the circumstances of today, how does it fit in? Why should he be the one sounding war drums, warning in April 2013 that there were threats of assassinations, schemes of who should become president, and now the most recent comments, he's talking about people's struggle, that he will lead the people's struggle?
Coincidentally, one of the people he talked about in 2013 that would be assassinated was the late General Ronda. Whether he was assassinated or not, that I don't know. But he is gone. But allegedly, in that piece, he was on the list. Now, when you look at NRM, before you point a finger at General Sejusa, ask yourself, what is the history of NRA? These were revolutionaries who volunteered out of conviction. Therefore, the foundational persuasion of their psyche was politics before they became soldiers. Now, even when they became soldiers, they never divorced their minds from that foundational persuasion. That is why General Keibula would say, we shall not hand over this country to opposition to take us back and destroy the peace that we have fought for. And then he forgets that actually the majority of the members of opposition were with him in Ruel. So they are birds of the same feather. Then also General Katumba, the statements he made, it is a manifestation of the fact that he is also from the same stock. Now Lumumba, Kasole Lumumba also adopts the same strategy. Your children will be shot. But it is a crime if a member of opposition now speaks back, challenging such talk. If law is to be applied, it must be applied across the board to everyone, not selectively. They cannot pick and choose. Now, these members, like the CDF and the IGP, the statements they made were political, yet they are supposed to be neutral, as my brother Ankunda has said. They should have kept their mouths shut, and they let the Minister of Internal Affairs make the statement, or the Minister of Defense, or even the President. But in uniform, donned in uniform, they have made statements that constitute war talk or fighting words. Now, my client, I still believe, is a prison of conscience, because he's one man who was imprisoned so many times while in the bush. Because he constantly questioned the system. Whenever anything went wrong, he questioned the system. And I cannot believe, and I don't subscribe to the notion that was advanced by Major Varamila Ranga that the first time he imprisoned him, he was saying some people should be more qualified for some position. This is a man who has flip-flopped. He was in FDC, criticizing President Museveni and NRM like there is no tomorrow. Now he's a darling of NRM. So his inconsistency does not persuade us that we should believe what
some people believe he's as inconsistent as your client.
No, for him.
But they were saying the same thing.
I thought that's true as well.
No, let me tell you. What is called inconsistency was only one position. In was it 2004 when he said, okay, I'm willing to work with you. And I asked him, I said, why did you do that? When you fundamentally disagree with President Museveni and his government. He said, in military there is what we call tactical withdrawal. He said, so, but now...
He said at a wedding, I think at the Quinjera, that he had been attacked by demons to act the way he had acted when he first...
And he said that was a tactical withdrawal to reorganize.
No, let's take a break. Let's take a break. Let's take a break.
You know, there took like 20 minutes.
We'll pick it up in a moment. Let's take a break.
Do you know we found guns at his place and soldiers? Huh? He said there were no guns. There were soldiers and guns.
Guns, official guns or non-official guns?
Well, whether guns are official, and they were there. So don't say there were no soldiers. He had soldiers and he had guns.
I think that's an important revelation. We'll explore that after the commercial break.
I hope we get fair.
Welcome back to the last segment of the Fourth Estate, and we're discussing security officers and their talk ahead of the February 18th elections, particularly with a highlight, which was the arrest of General David Sejusa. Today, for statements he has made, Paddy Ankunda told us he's been inconsistent in his statements. He's made some,
consistently inconsistent.
Consistently inconsistent. Yes, and he could, what was that thing that Tumukunde was being charged with? About the statements and the institution of the military.
Making public statements without proper authorization.
Without proper authorization. Yeah. Okay. Well, he doesn't have a unit that he reports to, so he doesn't have a commanding officer.
No deployment.
He's not deployed.
No salary.
And he doesn't earn a salary.
General Sejusa.
General Sejusa.
Yeah.
Have you been paying him?
Well, I'm not sure he's been paid. You see, first of all, by the time he did whatever he did, he wasn't actively under the military unit. So he was actually under President's office. In the capacity as an advisor, but also as heading intelligence organizations. So he couldn't draw two salaries. So he was also a member of parliament. So why are you sticking to the military salary?
So how are you're holding him? Moshawe calls him a prison of conscience. He says he was What do you constructive?
I think he's a prisoner.
When you create a hostile environment,
no, but
that makes the other
how
person
can the
unable to
UPDF,
perform.
is the UPDF admitting that it's been holding a man without an alternative means of income hostage without retiring him? Because if you don't pay him, you're not deploying him. How do you expect him to survive?
No, first things first.
But saying you still belong to us.
First things first. He's not a prisoner of his conscience. He's a prisoner of his mistakes.
What are those?
He knows it.
What are those mistakes?
He's not a retired officer. He's in politics. That's not allowed.
He doesn't earn a
He
salary.
wants to be retired.
He doesn't earn a
And
salary.
he wants to put people on pressure.
He doesn't earn a salary. He doesn't do any work. So how can he?
90 days were violated.
No, he's not retired. You see, that must be the underlying factor.
But you don't pay him.
He's not retired.
Why can't you?
We were not paying him. He's an MP. He was an MP and he was earning money from Parliament.
How can you claim him as an officer if you don't pay him, if you don't deploy him?
Let me tell you, one is an officer for as long as they're not retired.
Okay.
And the law picks you there.
Yeah, 90 days.
But also,
live above the law.
Okay, you've been trying to put pressure on the institution to retire.
Colonel and
I don't think
David,
that's correct.
Let's return to really what really matters. I think ordinary civilians who in the next 2 weeks, many of them will go and exercise their right to vote and want to go back home and be okay. The contradiction that bedevils your client is also a national contradiction. I don't think it will be sorted out by the election. This relationship between the army and civilian politics. A lot of countries have gone through serious ups and downs dealing with this contradiction. I don't think we should set the history aside and expect that because your client is now a de facto civilian, he should be treated as a civilian and not as a soldier when you're proud of his service and where he came from. These are just the complications that he finds himself in. Those are also the facts. I think also what is the fact is that you just mentioned his employment situation. A lot of Ugandans are unemployed. And do you know the fastest growing area of employment in Uganda? It's politics. Politics as the growth of the political class. Now the politicians are Ugandans are overrepresented. They are almost 4 times the size of the civil service.
There are about 2 million. There are about 2.2 million elective positions in this country.
You can imagine. The Electoral Commission told me at least 1.7 million people are going to be elected in this round of elections.
Yeah.
This last week, you saw the long lines of unemployed Ugandans, just like your client who qualified for a job, but they don't have a job. I think that one of the things Ugandans must take stock of is that the way we have engineered peace, and partly, and then I want to set the professional army aside, is that we have allowed for our politics to expand so that we do not what? Go to war with ourselves. And this democracy actually is an act of peacemaking with ourselves. But there has to be a point where we have to return to the fundamentals, which means that we need a civilian government that is professional, that is capable of creating jobs. Now, these are major issues. I don't think they're for the next 2 weeks. I think in the next 2 weeks, the rhetoric must calm down, people must go and elect, but they must reflect seriously about this very challenge. All those young people would have liked to have the privileges that your client has, which is actually have a serious job to go to.
So he's got a job, he lives it?
He has a job?
Who? He does. Not only does he have a job, but he's got into the business of politics, which has now become a career. And by the way, we're talking about all these crime preventers and other things. A lot of young people are getting into politics because that appears to be a place where you can be employed that's a euphemism, by the way, employed in some way.
But the question is, if Brother Nkunda says that the CDF and the IGP and Lumumba were quoted out of context, what makes him think that General Sejusa was not quoted out of context?
Well, that has to be proved. Because
that's why I'm saying
consistently
that there is the inequitable application of the law and interpretation. As long as you are in power, you are right. I went to Chireka and I served them habeas corpus to release my people who have been held there for 3 weeks in prison.
I don't think that's correct.
And they defied. They
defied
the
I feel David, and because Charles is a lawyer, I wrote in 2013 about the problems of pre-trial detention. Do you know, because I volunteer with the prison service, do you know that a lot of prisoners are detained for 4 years, 5 years?
Yeah.
They make the bulk of our broken
on
prison
remand.
system on remand, just like maybe your client. That's a bigger argument. Yes. Pre-trial detention actually offends the presumption of innocence. You know that.
But my brother Andrew, what I'm saying is that the police officer told me, said, these court orders don't mean anything to us. That's when I realized that once you are in power, then you are above the law. Why don't they apply?
I am just saying that the
laws are there to be broken. Then I say, when we break the law,
the broader issue that Andrew is raising.
But when you break the law, you are untouchable.
Someone is asking you, why are you surprised? Or why is your client surprised about this?
No, by the way, this is one man who is not surprised about anything. Even this one, before it came, he was ready for it.
So why aren't you waiting for
me as a lawyer, not a soldier. Me as a lawyer, not a soldier. Look at his constitutional rights, not at his mind as a soldier who is wired as a soldier.
Mr. Mushabe, you know that your client is still a serving military officer.
He's not.
He's being dealt with in accordance with the doctrines of that
he's not a serving military officer.
With the doctrines of that thing,
or as long as he's not retired, he remains a serving officer, and the law will work on him.
No, if you have not retired,
and by the way,
legally, he's not a soldier.
There cannot be any pressure to retire General Sejusa. He's not alone. He applied. His application is being considered.
90 days have expired.
They have expired.
By the way, also, remember that it's at the discretion of the commander-in-chief to retire or even not to retire.
But the discretion has a limit too.
You should not say that General is not special and he has to be retired tomorrow.
No, discretion has a limit too. That section of
you follow the law.
It's mandatory.
Do I get this right?
Yes.
That because General David Sejusa does not speak the language that favors the commander-in-chief, and the commander-in-chief holds the powers to retire him or not, he has decided to hold him there, not to free him to freely express himself and participate in politics.
No, but he has even stopped talking.
You have detained him. Now he can't talk.
The point I'm making,
he talked and you have detained him.
Even when he applied for retirement, it's not automatic that the commission's board will allow him to retire.
Does that take
and he's not alone
here.
Does
that take us back to where we started from? That when Henry Tumukunde speaks the language that the commander-in-chief agrees with, he retires him and frees him to speak the way he wants to speak.
After being
when David Sejusa speaks a language that disagrees with his commander-in-chief, and freeing him would allow him to freely canvass for support and stand with Kiza Besigye, stand with Amama Mbabazi, stand with Maureen Charia, stand with Mavirizi, he doesn't get freed.
No, but even
would that be wrong for someone to interpret it?
Lieutenant General Henry Tumukunde went through courts of law. You know that?
Yes.
And he was convicted. You know that?
He was not.
What are you talking about?
He was not. In fact, the
government
owes him cost.
Read the law.
The government owes him cost.
So it's not about the language you're talking. It's about the law.
But if
you must follow the law.
As an ordinary, I'm not in the military, I'm not in the politics, I'm a journalist, and as an ordinary citizen, what do I read in the different treatment of these people, of the different people who are into politics because of what Mushabe rightly put? They went into the struggle with a political ideology, and they have been fighting whether to stay in the barracks or to come out and do politics. And you free some to do the politics, and you retain others because the politics they speak doesn't agree with you.
No, that's not correct. Because you see,
evidence,
like they say,
anecdotal evidence suggests
patriotism is also about supporting your commander-in-chief, even if you don't agree with them.
You see, for example,
so if you
and the military, by the way, is very
if you speak in support of your commander-in-chief and you are the Inspector General of Police, it's acceptable.
Are you even supposed to speak against your commander-in-chief when you're still serving a military officer? Isn't that criminal?
He's not.
So we cannot allow this talk that he has been engaged in to spoil the cohesion that the UPDF has had over a long time, including this record of display. So the state must crack the whip on General Sejusa and tell him, you must stop.
But in
You
the
are still starting,
does the
you
state
cannot
crack
engage
the
in
whip?
personal politics.
Does the state crack the whip evenly across the board?
Of course.
You see, my client
Law
received a
is the
letter
law.
from CDF
Yes.
saying, I have received the application. I'm waiting for advice from the commander-in-chief, which means even the board does not have discretion to make a decision without the
the law.
The board makes a recommendation.
But Mr. Mushabe,
The board makes a recommendation, the president and the president decide.
Mr. Mushabe, are you reading
not
the
the board.
law using the legal lenses or the political lenses? Because if the law says the ultimate decider is the commander-in-chief,
It doesn't say so.
the appointments and
the
promotions, the appointments
The board
and promotions
recommends.
board,
The board recommends.
appointments and promotions
the
board.
law?
But the letter never said we recommended, but we are waiting for
No,
the
just a
commander-in-chief to approve.
Just a moment. The law says the appointments and promotions board of the UPDF makes a recommendation to the commander-in-chief. So the ultimate decider is the commander-in-chief.
Absolutely.
Who is,
So what's the problem with that?
who is the politician?
And you see,
with the same
now,
now,
not put
Now,
pressure on
the decisions
But
he's
he's not
making,
alone.
the decisions he's making to retire somebody or not to retire him is political. So it's no longer strictly professional military.
Okay.
You
We
see,
will spend the last few
people
minutes.
forget that soldiers are voters.
Mhm.
And they make a political choice because we are voters and we have rights.
So you are you also
You don't...
no going by your just immediate past statement,
Yes.
where you cannot disobey or disagree with your commander-in-chief. Do we take it that all soldiers are expected to vote for their commander-in-chief?
No, they're expected to obey
The
the
commander-in-chief.
commander-in-chief.
Yes,
Because we take
and
oath.
vote for the
And vote for
commander-in-chief.
That's your addition.
No,
Because that's not
obeying
spelled
means
out
total
under the law.
obedience.
So you don't add things into
Total
it.
We'll spend the last 2 minutes.
Doesn't work.
We have about a couple of minutes to get out of here,
Yeah.
and we'll spend the last couple of minutes talking about Tarehe Sita. You engaged in a lot of activities, starting I think a few hours from now.
Yes.
Tomorrow the cleaning up,
It has already
you
started,
launched,
actually.
Yes, you launched the other time with cleaning up and stuff. What exactly is going on? What are you celebrating?
Well, 35 years of steady transformation.
Steady progress.
Under, well, that's your addition. Under a peaceful and stable country.
Yes.
You see, sometimes we take peace for granted. And if you want to see what violence can do, try insecurity for just a few minutes. We don't want that to happen. So 35 years of fundamental change, this can be another debate, in our view, is worth celebrating. So we are out here, celebrate with the people for the support that they have given to the army for a long, long time, by the way. And we'll be doing a whole lot of stuff. We'll spell them out. We'll be cleaning up. We'll be treating people free of charge. We'll be building public toilets in this city to improve the sanitation. We'll be doing a whole lot of things, opening sewage. So, and these are civil-military relations activities that keep us closer to people. Again, they define the strategic relationship that we have. So Tarehe Sita is coming in that context. Yes.
Okay. And where is the national celebration? What's the theme?
Well, this is going to take place in Kampala. We are in partnership with KCCA because ordinarily these are things that are supposed to be done by KCCA. So we are supporting them. Now our theme this time around is UPDF, the People's Army, Vanguard of the Revolution for Socio-Economic Transformation and Democracy.
Okay. Let me just put this last one question to you. As a serving officer, do you feel a sense of contradiction that after so much sacrifice, so much investment, the military has failed to fully retreat to the barracks and allow civilians to operate, or the citizens to decide the politics?
You see, in 1964, when the militaries in East Africa retreated to the barracks, when they came out, they demanded for higher salaries. They didn't know how the economy was performing. They didn't know the politics of the country.
In which country was that?
In East Africa, in the entire East Africa, there were mutinies in 1964. Now, a military which does not understand the politics of the country is a potential criminal. I don't think we should allow the military to simply go to the barracks. I've been hearing these arguments of the UPDF in Parliament. This copycatting of systems from Western democracies and thinking that when the military interfaces with the civilians, then that's not democracy. I think that's not correct. We must understand that our military has a very different history. We may not be partisan, but I think we are through and through the political army.
Okay, the last word from David Mushabe. From you, looking at the broader issues, the security officers and 2016 elections, especially given that now your client is in the situation in which he is, he's still a security officer. We've had other security officers comment, and this show is standing in between 30 years, 35 years, and an election coming ahead. Your last word.
Well, I think if you ask my client, he would say, look, I'm disappointed. What we fought for in Ruwero took a detour when we got into government, and that has been his position. When you take a detour, you come back to the end point. You leave the main road, then you take Panya.
Yes.
So according to him, for the last 30 years they have taken Panya. And that is the reason why General Muntu was discharged, General Viraro was discharged, they are politicians, and he is not discharged because he has strong feelings about the direction where this nation should go. But it is not my position to make a political argument. Mine is a legal one. That 90 days expired at the end of March 2015. At that time, he should have received a letter saying, we are not discharging you, or we are discharging you. That section in the UPDF Act is mandatory. So UPDF is not above the law. So they should abide by the law. If we are going to feel secure with them, but if they are going to play with the law as and when they please, then we are not secure.
Okay, Angela, your last word.
Well, as you can see, it's very difficult to. The army and politics are like Siamese twins. It's a delicate operation to separate them if you want to preserve them separately, I think. And the Colonel is right to say that you can't run away from this history. My own view is that the Ugandans must accept the kind of political reform that will make it unnecessary to have a military that is directly engaged in politics and public affairs. And right now, where our democracy is, these electoral cycles, especially where you have got the founder of this army in it, just don't present the kind of conditions where the military will be standing aside and allowing the civilian government to continue. That, I said publicly in 2013, must be something for a Constituent Assembly to decide.
You want to say last word?
Yes.
Okay, please go ahead.
I think let the country calm down. This excitement about election and assuming that there is going to be violence, the security forces are ready to deal with it, and we will not allow violence to take us aback. This is very important. It's historic. We are at a turning point. To choose between progress, continued progress, and turning back. Let's pray all.
You know, there's some difficulty these days with words and phrases and the way we use our fingers. So when you say progress, people conclude steady progress. When you say go, people add forward, and then it's a very difficult situation. So I feel it's difficult.
But democracy is about that. Let people make their own conclusions the way they want.
I'm only hoping that in especially people in authority, people in the armed forces, people who lead the political parties, the candidates, and people who head institutions of this or of government, are going to be speaking the same language that tells people the determinant after February 18th should be the vote, and that everyone has an equal chance and an equal right to cast their vote for whoever they feel, and that should be, there shouldn't be any excitement. So when I hear all this talk of war, talk of violence, and I'm wondering and saying, who says the state doesn't have monopoly of violence, neither does
the state
other
in
people
Uganda actually does have monopoly of violence, but you know, Charles, let's be honest, the protagonists in this election are all interested in violence. The people who are the other wing of the army, which is running in the opposition, I think for them violence makes sense before the election, and for those who are in the establishment, violence makes sense after the election when they can crack the whip. And that is my honest assessment. But above and beyond that, as an ordinary citizen, I think that the rhetoric should tone down. Let the vote decide it. There is really no need to resort to other forms of instability. Countries have tried instability, it hasn't worked. And this progress by instability is actually an old model. It's something that happened.
I think that's a new one. Yeah. Progress by instability.
It's an old model. It used to be that coups and revolutions used to be the vogue thing to do. No. Today, young people are interested in change by innovation, by technology. This in fact, governments are not outfitted properly to allow for the change that young people want. They should calm down, as far as I'm concerned.
I'm hoping that the UPDF is going to be telling its officers whether in active service or not in active service.
And this is the message we will give them.
Yes.
That there can be only one result for the polling day. And this is peace.
Our time is out.
Whether rigging or not.
There will be no rigging. Are you going to rig?
Our time is out.
Don't tell me
we'll talk about election rigging in subsequent discussions here, because everybody's talking about election rigging. The president the other day said the opposition is planning to rig, and the opposition has been accusing him of rigging consistently over the last so many times he's been in the election. Our time is out. Thank you very much, David Mushabe of Mushabe, Munungu and Company Advocates. Thank you very much for making time for the show. And you are the lawyer for General David Sejusa. Thank you very much, Lieutenant Colonel Paddy Ankunda.
You're welcome, sir.
Defense and UPDF spokesperson. Thank you very much, Angelo Izama. Thank you very much to you all, our viewers. Unfortunately, we're not able to pick your calls today. The discussion got intense and we somehow missed picking your calls. We should have. So I apologize, but we'll be able to make good next Sunday. Have a good night.